And the biggest thing is like, we are not our successes, our failures, our titles, or our experiences. We are how we respond to those things. And I think when you're going, building, it's really hard to understand or to, to really know who you are without all of those things. And oftentimes, and oftentimes it happens in midlife, but it can happen anytime in life. If you lose a job, or if you get divorced, or your kids leave for college, or whatever it is, and your identity has been so wrapped up in those things, that's when we fall apart, right? That's when we feel lost. That's when we feel sad. That's when we feel confused.
You're listening to the Life Edge Podcast, the place to learn, grow, and succeed.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Life Edge Podcast. I am your host, Chris Staffelt. Today, I have a very special guest. Her name is Molly Sider. She is a speaker, a midlife coach, and the host of I Am This Age podcast. Molly, I am so excited to have you here with us today. Why don't you take a brief moment and just tell us a little bit about yourself and what you offer?
Thank you so much for that intro and for having me on the show, Chris. I'm very excited to be here. So yes, as you said, I am a midlife change coach, which basically means helping people who have reached midlife 40s-ish and 50s-ish and are like, oh, no, I don't know if you could swear in this show, but oh no, I'm not where I thought I would be at this age. And what do I do now? And how do I even figure out what my next move is? And in terms of the podcast, I am the creator, the producer, and the host of I Am This Age. And that's interviews with people who have made big life changes beyond the age of 40. So sort of proof that it's never too late to make a big change or to live the life of your dreams. And it's lots of stories about people's change moments, but also, the juicy stuff, like the emotions that go through big change and how do you navigate through those things, because that's the hard part. And that's the part that is going to trip you up. And oftentimes the part that will make people quit early. So that's me.
And I love this concept because we've all heard the phrase like midlife crisis. And I think we may have seen people who have gone through a midlife crisis. So I'm curious of how you ended up as a midlife coach. And if you would go into a little bit more of what that entails, because I'm guessing there's a story behind that.
Of course, there's a story behind it. There's a story behind everything. I am a storyteller also, after all. But I chose this area because I'm 45, so I'm in midlife. And when I was approaching the age of 40, I was panicked, like I said, because I was not where I thought I would be at that age. And I also was panicked because I was like, did I miss my opportunity to live the life of my dreams? And I was searching in podcast form, because I love podcasts, for stories and representation of people who are older than me, who were either living outside the box of, marriage and children and buying a house and the long career, or finding their lovely life, their extraordinary life later in life. And I couldn't find anything in podcast form. And so I thought, oh man, I guess I have to start this podcast myself because I need this. And my guess is that if I need it, somebody else out there needs this too. So I started the podcast first, and somewhere in the middle of all of that, I guess in the beginning of the pandemic, I lost my job. I was in the wine industry for a very long time. I worked in the fine wine industry, in fact, in New York and in Chicago. And in the very beginning of the pandemic, lost my job, but had already been feeling like, I don't think I want to do this forever, but I don't have any idea what it is that I want to do. And the pandemic sort of forced me to figure that out. And what I realized was I had already been studying a lot of like psychology and mindfulness, and had like a pretty strong practice in place. And I thought, well, and I'm a storyteller, as I had already mentioned. I used to host a storytelling open mic, and when I mean storytelling, I mean like kind of the Moth style. Have you ever heard of the Moth?
Never.
Okay, look it up. It's amazing, but it's basically telling, like, getting up on stages and telling true personal narratives. And it had been so healing for me to do this, and so all of that, like, together, I thought, this is what I want to be doing. I love sharing stories and I love hearing people share their stories. I think it's the best way to learn. It's the best way to create connection and community, and to just grow and to not feel so alone in our struggles, to release shame, all of the things that we need in order to grow as humans and live our best lives. And, you get through those methods. And so I thought, well, this is what I need to be doing. And so that's sort of why I'm here and why I'm working with midlife people. And also there's so much opportunity in this age range. And I think it's often hard to see it when you're so sort of stuck in your kind of in the muck of midlife. There's a lot going on in midlife, especially if you have families to take care of and bills to pay, which most of us do. It's a really huge time for a lot of people of reflection and like, okay, I've sort of gone through all of these things that I was told to do or that I thought I was supposed to do. So go to college and graduate and get a job and find a partner and, like I said, like buy a house and get a dog and have some kids. And then all of a sudden you're here and you're like, who am I? And, I like some of this stuff. Maybe I don't like all of it, or I'm feeling stuck. I feel like I can contribute more to the world. I'm feeling a little icky. I'm feeling some shame around feeling icky because, everything on paper looks great. Like whatever it is, your kids are graduating and leaving the house. And now you're like, wait, what am I supposed to do with my time? Like all of that stuff often happens around this age. And so it's scary. I think it's confusing. I think there's a lot of sadness that happens. And also, I believe there's so much opportunity. And so I'm like, let me help you. Let me show you actually what types of opportunities are out there. And let me help you figure this out and guide you so that you're not, you're not just like wandering through midlife lost and sad and confused and scared and all that stuff. So
what is the age range that you're working with? And the reason I ask is I have a story where I can completely relate to everything you're talking about. But for me, that happened at 28 years old. And it wasn't later in life, but I think part of that has to do with I didn't have the standard 4-year college experience where it's high school continued for 4 years and then you go start figuring out your life. Like right out of high school, I went to trade school, and then by the end of my 18th year of living, I was already operating in the workforce. So by the time a lot of my peers were even getting a job in the work field, I'm 5, 6, 7, 8 years in of doing the same thing essentially for 8 years, living that middle-aged life that you could say where you're focused on your career and growing and advancing. And so by 28, I was starting to already have a lot of those concerns, a lot of those struggles. It was even sooner of like, is this all I have to offer? Is this all I'm worth on this planet? Was a lot of the stuff going through my head. And you're right, there's a lot of emotional baggage and just things you have to deal with, because I was like, wait a second. I did everything I was told to do. I went and got an education and I learned a skill. And then I took that skill and I went and started making really good money. And then I got married, and then the dog, and at the dog was where I was finally like, let's pause for a second. Because adding these things to my life now, I love my wife and I'm so glad we're married, and this is not reflecting on her, but adding a lot of those other things to my life wasn't filling that void. And it was like, but I'm going through all the motions. Mm-hmm. And so that's why I'm curious of what the age range is.
Yeah.
Just because I feel like I experienced a lot of that at a little bit of a younger age.
Yeah. Well, I think you said a lot of really, you made a lot of really good points. First of all, the age range, just to answer that question simply, is typically like 40s and 50s. That doesn't mean that I won't work with somebody in their 20s. I think that a lot, like what you said, I could relate to also in my 20s. I think there's also, you said midlife crisis. There's also that thing like quarter life crisis. I think a lot of us get into our 20s and are feeling similar things like, well, what now? Like you know, always been in school. I've always, I've lived at home or whatever. And all of a sudden you're sort of maybe a few years into living on your own and creating a life for yourself, a career for yourself. And obviously you were living an advanced life. But I think it's relatable to a lot of, 20 something year olds too, where they're like, like what's happening? Am I supposed to have this all figured out? And you also feel so much older than you really are in your 20s, I think, or at least I remember feeling that way. Like, I can't believe I'm 25. I'm so old, I gotta find my spouse right away. I gotta have kids. Like I'm nearing 30. That's, and it's like, no. You've got plenty of time. And also I think you said something about like, oh, you have all these things. You're getting all these things. You're doing all the things that you were told to do, and it's not filling the void. And I think that's the most important part, like the most important piece, because while you figured this out when you were 27, most people, a lot of people, I'm sure there are a lot of other people like you and people, all in between, but a lot of people start, you're going, you're moving, you're creating and building this life, including your career and your family and your home and your, growing roots. And then all of a sudden, sort of somewhere in midlife when the kids are getting older or, even if I don't have kids. So, if you don't have kids and you're like, oh, I have this career, but I've been in it forever. And do I still want to do it? Or, is there more? Is there more out there? Is there something else I can do? Is it too late? That's also the big thing. Like, is it too late to try something new? Am I too old to try something new? And the thing is like, yeah, like all of those creating and building all of those pieces and putting them into your life are wonderful. And also they're not going to give you the happiness. They're not going to, they'll fulfill you in certain ways, but they aren't who you are. So I talk a lot about identity with my clients and also a lot in the podcast, if you listen to the podcast. And the biggest thing is like, we are not our successes, our failures, our titles, or our experiences. We are how we respond to those things. And I think when you're going, building, it's really hard to understand or to really know who you are without all of those things. And oftentimes, and oftentimes it happens in midlife, but it can happen anytime in life. If you lose a job or if you get divorced or your kids leave for college or whatever it is, and your identity has been so wrapped up in those things, that's when we fall apart, right? That's when we feel lost. That's when we feel sad. That's when we feel confused. And it's not to say that doing this work is going to completely alleviate all of that, sadness or confusion. But if you know who you are at your core without all of those things, it's so much easier when one of those things goes away to stay centered and to not fall apart and to make decisions about where you want to go next.
I like where you're headed with this because what I'm hearing is it's not, I called it a midlife crisis, but it sounds like it's more of an identity crisis. And when I think about like mothers in their last child is moving out and they're becoming an empty nester, they're now trying to figure out what to do because I don't identify as a mom anymore. I can't identify as a mom because I have no kids to mother. And it's like, well, no, it's just a transition. So how do you work people through that process of, like for me specifically, I was identifying as a low to middle class welder, trade skillsman, and that was it. But there was a good 2-year process I had to like kind of strip away to really figure out who I was. And how do you start the process? How do you begin working people through that transition?
So as I said, a lot of times now, I'm a storyteller and I find so much value in storytelling. So I help people to, especially people, sometimes people don't need this because sometimes people are just like, here we go. Like, let's just get into it. But oftentimes I think people need a little bit of, this is why they come to me. They need a little bit of help and support and some nudging of like, okay, how does this work and how do I figure this out? I want to figure this out and how does it go? And it's a lot of storytelling. It's a lot of really getting into some of the stories that maybe you haven't shared with other people in the world. So, we all have stories that we are telling. You and I are telling stories right now and over the dinner table and all the stuff, but we also have stories that we tell ourselves that we don't share with the world. And it's those stories that will get to the core of your identity. We hold these stories in from the world because there's shame around it, right? Like we're scared that if we admit something like say like, oh, I like, I hate my job or I don't know, whatever it is, like, oftentimes it's something different than that. Sometimes it's oftentimes something where we believe that if we share it with the world will reflect to us what we already believe to be true about ourselves, which is that we're bad. And there's shame around that, right? There's a reason why we're not sharing certain stories with the world or certain parts of ourselves with the world. But when we're not, we cannot show up to the world fully. We cannot engage with the world fully to our full capacity. And so a lot of what I do is helping to, start to pull out people's truths out of stories, reflect back at them what I'm hearing, because of course, no two people can hear the same story in the same way. And so if I can reflect back a new perspective, a new way of thinking about something, that is such an enormous shift. And, sometimes I say something and they're like, no, I don't think that's what's happening here. But it always helps to shift a perspective. Like you're like looking for some other story that might also be true. Like we're biased, right? We're biased of our own belief systems and our own stories. And certainly when we're not talking about that stuff, it solidifies that one biased story that we keep telling ourselves. And we go out into the world and we look for proof that story is true and we find it because that's how that works. That's how it works. But when you start to tell it to somebody who's like safe and supportive and who's capable of really listening and really reflecting back at what you're saying or what another meaning could be of this story, you start to consider other perspectives and that there might be another way of looking at something. And it's by doing that you get to the core of your values and what your belief systems are and what you really love and what which direction you want to go. It's also a release of so much energy. Like we spend so much of our energy hiding the things about ourselves that we're feeling shame around. We don't want people to know. And so we show up with a smile on our face when something is, actually maybe really bothering us. We don't communicate properly. Like there's so much wasted energy. And I feel like this is a cliche at this point, or at least in my world, but energy is currency. So we only have so much of it. So letting some of those stories out, there are a few things like, it's like carrying something super heavy, right? Like if you carry something super, super heavy by yourself, that's hard, and it's hard on your body and it's hard on your mind. And, you might hurt your back or a shoulder or something like that. And if you find somebody to share that load with you, it gets a lot easier to carry. It's the same thing with these like shame stories, right? If you share it with somebody, I guarantee you that the other person has felt similarly at some point, maybe is feeling the same way at that same time, or knows somebody who has. And the minute you understand that you're not alone in whatever the feeling is that you're feeling, all of that gets so much lighter and so much easier to carry. And when that happens, we're spending less energy on that. And we can redirect our energy. First of all, we understand we're not alone. We understand what we value, and we understand, we start to gain tools to work through this stuff. And we are spending so much less energy on just like hiding, and feeling bad about ourselves or whatever. And then we can redirect all that energy and what we really want to do with our lives and focus on that and move forward. So there's so much here. I can talk about this forever.
It's so interesting because this is the first time you and I have had this long of a discussion about this topic, and everything you just said is essentially what I had to go through. I now that I look and reflect back on that period of life, I had a really good mentor who became a best friend, who ended up marrying my wife and I. Like he's the pastor who did my wife and I's wedding. And I didn't realize how important he was to that transition until later, of being able to have somebody to share my story with, to share what I was concerned about, to share some of the things I felt shame over or guilty over. I realized how important he was in my transformation because I was able to verbalize a lot of the guilt. And a lot of it didn't make sense. Like I was guilty or felt shamed that I wanted more than what my family had produced. And for some reason that because I wanted to strive for a better life, I felt like I was telling them internally that I didn't like what they had. And I was like having to reconcile this. And it's, well, no, we all have our own pasts and we all have our own desires. And it's okay that I want something different than what my parents had or what the rest of my family is going for. But until I verbalized that, I was unable to cross that bridge.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's such a great example. And I would go even deeper to say that it probably made perfect sense. I don't know, very much about your history, but it probably, my guess is, made perfect sense once you start to pick apart, like, wait, why do I want more when everybody else is satisfied with, what they have? And to pick that apart, it actually probably made a lot of sense. And, you use that starting off point as like, okay, well, what do I really want and where do I want to go from here? Because maybe it isn't actually as important to me as it used to be or as I thought it should be because of, my upbringing or whatever your circumstance was that made you feel like you wanted to get more, like it probably made perfect sense for who you were and what you were doing and your path at the time. And also it sounds like you were like, hold on, wait a second. What's really happening here?
You just made me realize something else now.
Okay. Tell me.
So I didn't growing up, I got to do a lot of mission work with the church I was a part of. So I spent a lot of time in Mexico serving very underprivileged people. And then I spent 2 weeks in Ecuador and then like a month and a half in South Africa. And I got to experience all this before I was 18. So I got to experience how blessed we are to live in this country. And with all of its faults and all the things that it has going on, we're still given this great opportunity to succeed. Yeah. And so that's my biggest why now of what drives me to do what I'm doing, what pushes me to keep going, was because I know I've been given an opportunity and I don't want to waste it. And so I want to live up to what my full potential is with the given opportunities that I have to be born in America and be able to create and grow. And so I felt I was limiting my potential by staying where I was at. And so I had these two conflicting beliefs, like it's unfair for me to want more, but I also don't want to limit my potential. And so it was really hard to reconcile a lot of that for a while.
Yeah. It makes so much sense. Of course you would want to push yourself as much as you could after seeing all of that you saw all over the world. It makes total sense. this is the other thing about like midlife too, is that that's different from your 20s, is that you have more lived experiences. You just have more information to use. I'm always saying life is our learning journey, and I'm just gathering information and then I'm making changes accordingly. Period. That's all we've got, right? And in midlife, you just have more experience than you do in your 20s. And so you have more to work with. But you have to be willing to take a breath and stop and reflect and think about things. And, it's really hard to do that without some support and somebody actually like asking challenging questions and helping to pull things out and reflect back. So just like full circle, that's that's why I like to work with people a little bit older, but I don't know.
It's funny because I feel like this turned into a podcast where I'm being interviewed.
Yeah. A little bit of coaching session. It's okay. Kind of.
No, this is great. I'm so fascinated by this concept of this identity issue, because I think now I'd be interested to get your thoughts. I think now it feels like, and you touched on it a bit before, but there is even an identity crisis for a lot of the younger age people right now, coming out being like, wait a second, this college thing isn't right. None of this stuff makes sense. And they're trying to figure out, even at a younger age now, like, who am I and what purpose do I want to have and what do I want to fulfill? Yeah. And I feel like that's becoming a broader issue, more than just, and I can see a lot of the why for so long it was more the midlife, because everything was so planned out for a while, especially for you and I. It was like, nope, you go to school, you get a job, you go work, you get your house, you get a wife, you have a family. And then by the time you're 40, 50 years old, you start saying, wait a second, what do I want to do on this planet?
Yeah.
And people are starting to somewhat wake up to that even a little bit sooner.
Yeah. I think that's true also. I think, and I love this. And I, sometimes I'm just like, wow, people in their 20s are like in a headspace that I only figured out in the past, 6 years. And how amazing. Yeah, I'm not sure what the question is exactly, but what I would say to that is, I'm always saying stay curious, like curiosity over everything. and also staying open to life. For younger people, again, like you don't necessarily have as much lived experience. You don't have as much lived experience, just period. Mm-hmm. I think, oftentimes 20-something-year-olds feel like they have all of the experience and all of the knowledge. And this isn't like a diss to younger people at all. It's just a fact. Like nobody does. You can't possibly, because, just like somebody in their, 70s or 80s might say the same thing to you and me. I think the thing about finding your identity, and especially at such a young age, is paying really close attention to what you're doing and what you're affected by, and how you respond emotionally, and getting curious about why you might be responding in that way, and staying curious and open to other ideas, and other ways of living, and open to, experiences. Like you can't grow, you can't figure out who you are, what your identity is, without that piece of curiosity. Like, oh, look at that, I'm feeling super angry about this thing, I wonder what that's about. But also like new perspectives, like in career and relationships, in politics, like whatever, I think there's also, especially right now, in this climate, like there's a lot of dogma, there are a lot of people who are like, I know the answer, I'm right, you're wrong, period, goodbye. And That's really dangerous for a lot of reasons. But also, if you're the type of person who actually wants to understand yourself better so that you can better contribute to the world, it is imperative that you listen to other people. And I'm always like, tell your story, but also listen to other people tell their stories. It's just as important. Get curious, ask lots of questions, and allow your mind to be changed. Be open to having your mind changed on everything, because it will. Because you and I also, I don't know how old you are, but like, I'm not the same person that I was in my 20s. Absolutely not. And I'm grateful for that. And I loved who I was in my 20s. I had a wonderful time. But thank goodness I'm not, because what would I be doing? Who would I be if I had the same exact mindset that I had in my 20s? I feel like I'm always quoting Adam Grant, and I can't remember if you and I talked about this, but Adam Grant is always like have your mind change, like think like a scientist. If you're not learning something new, then you're not growing, you're not learning, you're not moving. So all of that stuff is so, so, so important. And just understanding that like it takes time and it takes work, and somebody in their 20s might not figure it out until your 40s, and that's normal and okay. And you might not figure it out until you're 60. There are plenty of people out there who never figured this stuff out.
Mm-hmm. And that was where I wanted to get into next. And I love you talking about curiosity right there, and emphasizing it, because I agree. I think that is so important. I am constantly pushing those around me, like, keep learning, keep growing, keep figuring things out, keep trying new things. And I get pushback. Like, I like being content. I like this. I like that. And my response is, you don't want to wake up 5 years from now, 10 years from now, and be like, wait a second, I am the same person I was 10 years ago. Nothing has changed. And the reason I can say that is because I've done that. I've had that wake up call, and it's not pleasant. It's not enjoyable at all. Yeah. And in order to combat that, you have to keep staying curious. You have to keep growing. You have to keep wanting to learn new things. And I wanted to ask you two questions there, because you started to touch on two separate points. First, is it normal? Like, is it normal for people to, at some point in life, wake up and be like, wait a second, what's going on here? Is this what I really want? Because I think sometimes people feel alienated when they start thinking that they're the only person thinking like that. And then second, what are some of the signs that you're now coming alive or being awakened to the fact that you may need to do a deeper dive to figure out who you really are and what you really want in life?
Yeah. Well, I think those are sort of like, they're the same. Like, when you're, first of all, in my experience, in my own personal life and with the people that I work with, yes, that's very normal. I think, people, like you were saying, oh, some people are just like, I'm good. I don't need to do anything else. And that's fine. Great. Like, then don't. Most likely you'll want to at some point, but people change when they're ready to change, and not a minute before. And so, yes, that's normal. And it's the journey is different for everybody. And this is something that I'm constantly reminding myself of. Like, there's so much I don't know if this is a real word, but I say this a lot, comparisonitis. Like, my journey is different than your journey. And it's different than everybody else's journey. And it's really hard to not compare. But the fact is that, like, I changed. I grew into the person that I'm so proud to be right now when I was ready. And sometimes that means rock bottom, sometimes that means, and oftentimes that means you've got nowhere else to go but up. And that's the moment where you're like, all right, I got to do something about this. I got to figure this out. And that starts with like, well, who the hell am I? What do I want? There's, I don't know. I don't like love this quote, and I'm not even going to say the quote right, but there is so much value and meaning in it. Like in this, like the coaching world, we say like, if you're not changing, you're not alive. They say you're dead, basically, not actually dead, but you're not living. Change is inevitable, and we can resist it or we can embrace it, period. And if you resist it, you're just going to suffer a whole lot more. But again, like you'll change once the suffering becomes so great that you don't have another choice. And that's okay. If that's what it takes, that's okay. And that's normal. And lots of people wait until that moment. And lots of people don't. Lots of people are just like, I am ready now, and I'm seeing other people doing things cool, and I'm inspired, and let's go. And it just depends.
That's really refreshing. I actually needed to hear that because it's hard for me sometimes because I've been on this journey of growth for so long that it's hard to remember that before the big shift, there was nothing anyone could have said that would have pushed me to change. It doesn't as I reflect back on it, there's probably like 10 or 12 times where I had opportunities with good people who were offering me great advice, but I wasn't ready to hear it yet.
Yeah.
And we have to be compassionate that everyone is on their own journey and that we can't force, as much as we want somebody to experience things in a new way and to grow, because from the outside, sometimes it's real easy to see like all you got to do is make this shift. Like it's real easy. Let's work through it. And life gets a whole lot better, but you can only want something for someone else. They have to want it for themselves before they're actually going to do something about it. And that was really refreshing to hear that people move at their own pace.
Yeah. Yeah, that's so funny. That's why, we're all so quick to give advice. And also why it's so important to have a support system, and like hopefully a professional support system, a coach, a therapist, somebody who, isn't going to just try to give you advice that they would do. And also why it's so important to like actually, know who you are so you can move in the way that is going to actually be sustainable for you and successful, whatever your definition of success is. Yeah, you cannot change anybody else. You just can't. And again, this is something that I'm constantly telling myself. Always reminding myself of, it's hard because you see other people and you're like, I want the best for you. And it's so obvious what you need to do. But like, the other piece to that too is when you're trying to change somebody else, like you're robbing them of the opportunity to learn and grow for themselves. You've done it, and they need to do the same thing. And don't take that experience and opportunity away from somebody else.
Yeah, because that journey becomes their story, which is so important to them then being able to help others as well.
Yeah. Yeah. All of that.
Well, Molly, thank you so much. As we wrap up, there's one question I love to ask all the guests, and that is, what is one life lesson you want to share with everyone that you've learned throughout your life?
There are so many, but I love to say this one thing. It's intention over expectation. That the thing that so often creates the most suffering or anxiety, which I suffer from, is our expectations. And if we can let go, and this is like, it's never going to be a perfect system, but if you can remember or remind yourself why you're doing something, what is your intention, rather than what you're expecting to get out of the thing, you will inevitably, first of all, stay focused and stay grounded and also in your identity, but you'll release so much unnecessary suffering and anxiety. So intentions over expectations. That's my advice.
Oh, I love it. And it's so true.
Yeah.
Why don't you take a moment and just tell the listener and the viewer where they can find you and where they can connect with you?
Yeah. So you can go to my website. It's just mollycider.com. My last name is spelled like apple cider, but with an S as in Sam instead of a C, which was fitting for when I was in the wine industry. And you can find me on Instagram. I'm Molly at this age, and you can DM me there if you have any questions. And of course, tune into my podcast, which is called I Am This Age. It's a bi-weekly interview show. And you can find that anywhere you get your podcast.
Oh, that's great. And I will, for everyone watching and listening, I will make sure to include links to her website, social media, as well as the podcast down below. Go give it a listen. Follow her, rate, review. Let's help push her podcast up there. And for all of you that like this podcast, please like, subscribe. And for anyone listening, please feel free to rate and review. And as always, share it with your friends so that we can help spread the word and continue to get amazing guests on here like Molly. So, Molly, thank you so much for this interview. It has been fantastic.
Oh, thank you so much. It's been such a pleasure, Chris.